Welcome to Christian Life YouTube channel. Today we discuss why Catholic priests do not marry. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Why Catholic priests are not allowed to marry. The tradition of celibate Catholic priests is canon law, not a dogma, which means it is not set in stone and could change. The married priesthood is not unbiblical per se, as Peter, the disciple of Jesus, was married. However, there is much scriptural and historical evidence supporting a celibate priesthood. There are married Catholic priests. Some have come from the Anglican Church to Catholicism. Other married priests are found in some Eastern Rite Catholic churches. These rites were part of the Orthodox split in the 11th century, but returned to the Catholic fold later and were allowed to maintain their traditions, including married clergy. However, if they were celibate at the time of ordination, their tradition requires them to remain that way. Also, bishops in the Eastern rites are not allowed to be married. So even in the Eastern churches, marriage is only allowed in certain circumstances. There are pros and cons to the married clergy, but one thing is for sure. The Bible says a family man needs to put his family first, not the church. Yet a priest is called to make service to his congregation his first priority. This makes for a difficult dilemma. The Roman Catholic Church bars most married men from becoming priests, but that rule could, in theory, be changed. Priestly celibacy is rooted in tradition, not Catholic dogma, so the Pope could change it overnight. So far, Pope Francis has given little indication that priestly celibacy is on the chopping block. However, Archbishop Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's new Secretary of State, and Pope Francis No. 2 has said the issue is open for discussion, though still a firmly rooted Catholic tradition. Those who are happy with the current rules say priestly celibacy allows priests time and energy to focus completely on their flock and to emulate Jesus, who was unmarried, more faithfully. But those who would like to see married priesthood argue celibacy is so difficult for many men that it dissuades people from the priesthood and can lead to sexually immature people pastoring their flocks. A distinction must be made from the outset. Some Catholic priests can be married and some can't. This distinction is possible because there is nothing in the deposit of the faith that prohibits priests from being married. There is a long-standing practice, though, to require celibacy of Latin Rite priests. In the Eastern rites, celibacy is generally not required, although it is required for bishops. Additionally, you will find married Catholic priests who come, for the most part, from one of the following scenarios: former Protestant ministers who have been ordained as priests under provisions approved by Pope St. John Paul II, former Anglican priests who have been received into the Catholic Church and been ordained Catholic priests after erection of Anglican ordinariates by Pope Benedict XVI, or Orthodox priests who are received into the Catholic Church. The Latin Church does not see celibacy as an imposition. Rather, it sees celibacy as a sign that the priest's consecration to the Lord is with an undivided heart, where they give themselves entirely to God and to men. Celibacy is a sign of this new life to the service of which the Church's minister is consecrated. Accepted with a joyous heart, celibacy radiantly proclaims the reign of God. For any Catholic priest, if already ordained a priest, they cannot subsequently marry. Likewise, marriage after ordination is not possible ordinarily without permission of the Holy See. This would apply in a situation if a wife died. While priests are allowed to marry in the Eastern tradition, bishops remain celibate. Because of different needs and customs, the Church in her wisdom allows freedom in the small t traditions of the East and West. But while the traditions vary, the valued model of celibate, supernatural fatherhood remains universal. Married to the Church. The roots of celibacy requirements go back to Jesus Christ. According to the Bible, he was an unmarried virgin. In the Bible, Jesus is often likened to a bridegroom whose bride is the Church. Many of the early martyrs and Church fathers emulated his life of chastity. The first head of the Catholic Church, Peter, was married, as were many of the other apostles during Jesus' time. But in the New Testament, marriage was seen as a holy option for those who would otherwise have trouble controlling their sexual urges. From a spiritual perspective, priests are called to act as another Christ, which includes his celibate lifestyle. There are still a few married Catholic priests. Episcopal and Lutheran priests who were married and then converted to Roman Catholicism can be ordained, and men in the Eastern rites, such as the Ukrainian Church, can marry before becoming ordained. Celibacy. Celibacy makes sense. Single men are freer to serve their parish, have fewer reasons for holding back in ministry, and avoid favoritism. But while all these are secondary benefits to a celibate priesthood, none of them are the Church's true reason for upholding her tradition. Rather, in what appears to be a contradiction of terms, the Catholic priest is celibate in order to be freed for fatherhood. Priests renounce natural fatherhood in order to more perfectly image the supernatural fatherhood of God. While God's fatherhood looks different than the natural fatherhood we're familiar with, his role as father is mysteriously more true and complete than fathers who generate natural life. Every other image of fatherhood is a faint echo of the supernatural fatherhood of God. Priests, who still fall short of God's example, more closely mirror this complete role of father. Like God the Father, they give of themselves entirely for the sake of a supernatural fatherhood. This is fittingly reflected in the total self-gift of celibacy. Some critics say that mandatory priestly celibacy should go. In the Catholic Church, we have 2,000 years' history of its impossibility for many people, said Richard Sipe, a sociologist and former Benedictine monk who has been married for 43 years. Lots of people just can't do it. In a 2012 study in the Journal of Prevention and Intervention in the Community, researchers found that a sizable minority of priests had sexual relationships, some with men and some with women, during their tenure, and 30% admitted to masturbation. In our modern developed world, the idea of sacrifice is a hard concept to sell. Celibacy is a sacrifice which pays high dividends. One recent helpful thing in the shortage of priests is that the deaconate is now becoming very popular. Many married men are becoming deacons, and as such they can perform many of the responsibilities of priests. If you are married and would like to become a priest, I recommend looking into the deaconate. You will find a fulfillment of many of those desires to minister in the church. Perhaps one day the married priesthood will be allowed under canon law. If the magisterium decided on that, I would of course accept it. But until that day there is much wisdom and historical precedence in the Church's current position. In Matthew chapter 19, his disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can." The Catholic priesthood, in a sense, fosters a psychosexual immaturity by imposing celibacy. Other research has suggested that more men would be interested in priesthood if celibacy became optional. With a shortage of priests looming, many tout eliminating the celibacy requirement as a possible solution. Mainline Protestants, whose preachers and ministers are allowed to marry, are also seeing their number of clergy plummeting. Logistical challenges. Currently, priests are paid through the donations people offer to the church. In addition, priests often serve thousands of parishioners, and are the only ones who can offer the sacrament of Mass, where the wafer and wine are thought to become the body and blood of Christ. Having a family could take away the time and energy priests now focus on the spiritual needs of their flock. Other Christian denominations have had 500 years to work out how to support marriage and spiritual work, but the Catholic Church would need to do all that work from the ground up. Despite the Catholic Church's long-standing prohibition on married men becoming priests, Pope Francis said he might consider making exceptions to ordain married men who are already heavily involved in the Roman Catholic Church in certain circumstances. The idea would be that they could work in rural areas that suffer from a shortage of clergy, according to his interview with a German newspaper. The chastity requirement is spelled out in the Church's Code of Canon Law as such. Clerics are obliged to observe perfect and perpetual continence for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, and therefore are bound to celibacy, which is a special gift of God by which sacred ministers can adhere more easily to Christ with an undivided heart and are able to dedicate themselves more freely to the service of God and humanity. Thank you so much for watching Christian Life YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to watch our daily content.